Hey guys, a little update on the Sky here. So I finally did order up a roll cage. I could not find anybody that would bend the parts for me locally here in Detroit. After several calls to several different shops, nobody actually got back to me. Seems like nobody wants money these days. So what I did instead was ordered it from RPM Motorsports, but they've got about a 10-week back order. So that means that I've got 10 weeks before I can actually get this thing onto any track, because that's what I'm going to need to get the harnesses on and everything like that. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is actually take off my header, get access to my oil feed lines so that I can easily run my custom gauges, do the same with the coolant. And while I'm in there, I think I might replace the cat with a high flow cat that takes up a little bit less space, get me a little bit more power. So let's dive into it. Did we get new car parts? I think we did. Let's go look. Fresh bag. New gauges. I got some not super fancy gauges here. Oil temp, oil pressure, water temp. The Sky does not have any of those anywhere on the dash, so I figured, hey, you know what, those are the safe ones. Time to actually get some and make sure that the car doesn't blow up, or at least I can have some sense of early warning if something's going wrong. I'm going to have to build a bezel for all these, decide where I want them to go. I don't have any pods or anything, and then I've got to install the senders, so 2 for oil and then 1 for water. Not quite sure where I'm going to put those yet, but hey, we'll figure it out. So we got our gauges here, and I think what I'm going to do is there's a nice little space right in here, and I think I'm just going to build a plate that mounts off the side of my gauge cluster right now and just has all 3 of my gauges looking straight at me in the driver's seat. So I'll build the little cardboard template first, and then we'll make that out of sheet metal and then see if I have to anchor it anywhere else to make it feel decent, and then yeah, we'll drill some holes in it and set the gauges in place. I found an old computer case, and back from when computers were actually pretty hefty. So this is some good hefty sheet metal, and then I'm going to use it for the template, just so I don't have to waste a piece of good sheet. Trace it out, cut it out, see what we can do. Shit. I just realized I did this backwards for the car. So I gotta do it on the other side. Well, my phone overheated, and while it was overheated, I decided to build the brake here. So you can see I bent it, and then I marked where I'm going to go. Originally I was going to go in here, and I wouldn't fit with the layout that I had, so I had to move it out a little bit. And now I'm just going to drill the holes for the actual gauges and put them in, see if it works. Well, clearly this hole saw was not really meant to do that heavy of a metal. I should have probably oiled it first, but now the bit's shot. I gotta go see if I got another bit that'll fit inside this hole saw, and then I'll definitely put some cutting oil on it next time. All right, so I went and grabbed one of these Milwaukee hole dozers. I have a bunch of these. I just didn't have one in 2 inches. These things are fantastic. If you don't have them, they work great on metal. They work great on wood. Really nice hole saws. Way better than the Harbor Freight crap. And they also have this really kick-ass chuck that for the bigger ones, you buy the chuck separate, and then the hole saws, and it just twists on by hand. And then once it's on enough, there's a little locking pin in there, and then chuck it in. So let's cut some more holes. Mental note, don't put your coffee right next to where you're shredding metal. Oh well. Guess I won't have the rest of this coffee. All right, so got my gauges lined up. Of course, I was a little off on this one, which bugs me a little bit, but it's not too bad. So they're in there, and then I just have to drill a hole in the plate here and a hole in the plate here so that it's actually sticking in place. And if we take it out, you can see where those actually are. You can see them bolted in right there, and then right into the cluster itself. See how that goes, and then we'll paint it and install it for real. Well, I took my console out so that I could tap all the holes, and what we're gonna do is do the old snapperoo test fit and make sure it all works. So here we go. And there we have it. I gotta put a bolt through that hole. That one does line up over there. Everything fits nice and clean. So let's paint it, and then we can actually install it. Finished up my plate here, and here are my gauges. They fit right in there nice and smoothly now. So I'm gonna pop those in and then go pop the dash back in the car, and then we can worry about figuring out some wiring later. I gotta get a longer bolt for the top hole because the one I set aside was not long enough. But this is what it looks like. Not too bad. And what I might actually do is, now that I've got this here, is mount a little shelf over the top so I have some degree of shade on pretty hot days. This is pretty easy to read. I don't know how easy these will be to read in the sun until I fire them up and see how bright that blue is. If you ever do a Gambler 500 car and then you completely ruin it and then you end up donating it to scrap, a good thing to do is to cut all the wiring out of it before you're done, because then when you do stupid other projects, you have nice big chunks of wiring loom that you can use and not have to go buy it. So I'm going to take this and cut it down quite a bit, get some of the wires out of it that I need to run my sensors, and should be good. So here we are at my workbench. Here's the signal cables for our 3 different gauges, and you can see they're all the same down at the bottom. So you got 12 volt, which will be switched power. You got a red, which is 12 volt switch power. You got black, ground, and then green's the actual signal wire for each one of those. So what I'm going to do is take all these guys, combine all the blacks and the reds together, put them on a little fusible link, tap that out of the BCM, and then I'm going to take each of the signal wires and wire them up as well. I'm going to use these handy dandy little waterproof plugs as well, so that if I ever need to take apart the gauge cluster or whatever, I can really quickly just unplug them rather than having to go run through and fish and cut wires and that sort of thing. So no, don't pay attention to that. That doesn't go anywhere in here. Cool. Let's get to town on it. I just put my fender back on, and the place to actually get access to passing through the firewall is behind this big bitch right here. So where my hand is touching, that's your pass-through for the main harness, and that's where I want to go through for my wires so I don't have to drill another hole. And it's going to be kind of a pain in the butt to do that because I have the battery back in and the fender back on, and I really don't feel like taking both of those off again. And this thing's kind of in the way. So I'm going to try it with a coat hanger, see if I can get it to slide through. If I can, we'll be good. If not, well, might cut my wrists up and have some not fun for the next little bit. From inside the car, I've taken the body control module off, and then up above that, you can see here, this is the grommet on the other side. And it was just way too much of a pain in the ass for just the few wires that I was going to run to actually take it out. It's all taped up. The main harness is all in there. So what I did was stuck a screwdriver to the side of it, and I poked a little tiny hole in the grommet, which will kind of automatically seal itself up because I'm just putting 3 little 18 gauge wires through it. So now I got to just attach the wires to the other side of the screwdriver with some tape, pull them back in on this side, and I'll have my wires fed. So I got my plug all done, and I got it all wired up and labeled here for where those sensors go. And then I've got the opposite side of it over here, right? So that guy's gonna go into there. And then I've got all of those labeled up at this end as to which colors they are. So I line up the colors, plug it into the right sensor, or the right gauge over there, and we should be good. So as is typical, you get all your nice stuff put in and installed and everything back together, and you just end up taking it all apart again. What I need to do is get the turbo off itself and the manifold off, because underneath there are 3 feed lines that I can tap for oil. That's where I can get my oil temperature and oil pressure senders tapped in without having to do anything too fancy. And then there's also a coolant sensor down there, which is kind of hard to see. And I should be able to tap that as well, so I can get an actual water temperature gauge as well. Yeah, it's going to be a decent amount of work, but since I've got another 8 to 10 weeks before I'll actually be able to run this thing on any tracks, let's tear it apart. All right, so these are 15 mils on the up pipe. And they're very tight. Even with the double wrench, they're not breaking loose too easily. So may have to get out the breaker bar or get out the cheater pipe. There we go. These heat shield bolts are 13 millimeters, and 2 of them are up here on top, it looks like. Well, they're actually nuts, not bolts. And they're pretty easy to get off, one here and one there. There's another one way down in there that is going to probably be a pain in the butt to remove. So let's see how it goes. So the more I look at this, so that bolt down there is not going to come out with the turbo in place, but you can't actually get the header bolts or the exhaust manifold bolts off with that heat shield in place. So that means I actually have to take the turbo itself off once I get the up pipe off, and that looks like there are 2 bolts down there that are actually holding it to the exhaust manifold. Once I get that off, this whole thing comes off, then I can get my heat shield off, then I can get my header off, then I can get everything in there. Shouldn't be too big of a problem, but yeah, man, this thing is order of operations hell sometimes. Okay, so this barb is the same as this barb. So let's see if we can find the right size tool, and maybe, just maybe, I can get the bottom end off, and maybe I don't need to get the top end off. That looks like it'll work. All right, so let's talk about these things, right? So these lines are generally all over this motor. You can see there's another one right here, comes down, and they're air recirculation. So when air comes out of the manifold cover, it goes and recirculates back into the turbo, or when it comes out of the head, it recirculates back into the intake. The problem I have with these things is that GM has figured out how to modify space and time to actually ever be able to get these off, because this is the tool that you use to get them off. And I don't understand how, even with it pressed out, you'll ever get a tool in there to actually pry these off. And the only thing I can think of is that there's some special magic tool that I don't know about that pushes them out. I don't know. You can see all it is 4 little tabs on the inside, and this clips around, pops out, and then you can just pull and you're good to go. But how you get them out with spacings like this, there's a millimeter of space there. So I don't know what to do to actually get this line off the turbo.
All right, so I did a little reading on how to remove those lines, and it seems like for quick disconnects, they're probably about the least quick thing in the world. You got to get a zip tie. You have to cut the zip tie up, and then you got to shove it in between the very small space to kind of release those quick disconnects so that you can actually pull it off. It'll go back on really easily, but getting it off is a total pain in the ass. So let's see if this works. Well, I just spent the last half hour getting the most impossible bolt in the world out from underneath here. And now the bolt's out. I can't get the damn heat shield out anyway without taking the turbo off. I can't take the turbo off without taking this thing off. This thing's a nightmare. This is way more work than I thought it was going to be for a car that's in not an ounce of rust on it and is really clean. This has just turned into a mess. Luckily, the O2 sensor is pretty easy to get to. I put a 7/8 on it and cracked it, and now it's pretty much finger tight, and I can spin it out the rest of the way. So at least something came off easy in this relatively pain in the ass day. I got all the bolts out for the up pipe except for that one you can see down there, or nuts off. That one, man, it is a bitch. I just don't have any angle to throw, and because the heat shield is still stuck in the way, I can't get any more throw out of it. I can't get the impact in there. I may have to go get a gear wrench or something like that that has a much tinier ratchet. I can't even get a ratchet handle in there, so I don't know what I'm going to do there. But I'm going to move underneath and take off the remaining bolts because there's a few down there. They should come off pretty easy. All right, here we are underneath the car, and you can see there's a 15 right there, and then there's two 13s here, and then over on the other side there's another 15, and then another 13 hiding back behind there, and that's all I need to take out to get this up pipe out. I'm gonna hit it with big chungus over there, and hopefully it just rips it out. All right, impact ripped them out, no problem, nothing broken, nothing bad, so we're all free here. Now it's time to just figure out how to get that last bolt out, and then I can pop this thing out, and then hopefully I'll have more room to work on the other bits to get off to get to my oil lines. So I was finally able to get a 1/2-inch breaker bar on there. It was the only thing I had, and it was a 15-inch that I had to rotate 6 different times to find the right air, like how I could rotate it so that this would actually stick on, and I couldn't stick it on together because the pipe over here was in the way. So I had to stick the socket on first and then try to fit this into it. And then once I was able to do that, now I should have enough leverage to pop this thing open. After I broke it free, the only way I could find to get in here was a 15 with an extension and then a swivel head, and then I could actually get enough tension on it to take it out. God, man, what a nightmare. But our up pipe is free. You can see the big gap in it now. Kind of sliding around. I'll have to wiggle it around to figure out how to get it out of there. And I don't know if it's easiest from the top or the bottom, so we're gonna have to figure that out. We're back underneath the car, and you can see, man, this is a little tight here. So over here, there are this bracket that the up pipe mounted to in the cat, and there's two 15mm bolts that'll hold that in place. There's no way this thing's coming out of here without taking that little bracket out. It just won't clear it. But I think if I take that bracket out, I can slide it out through the bottom. So I'm going to take those off and then keep trying. All right, if you wiggle it enough, it'll eventually fall out the bottom. And you can grab it, yank it out. There's my cat. All right, so now we have clear daylight all the way up to all of the studs that we need to take, or the nuts we have to take off the studs to get the turbo off. And then you can see where the hard lines come in underneath here. So that's what these guys are. That's your oil feed line and coolant lines and stuff like that for the turbo. Those should be pretty easy to get off. First, I'm going to take off the 4 nuts on the studs here. And once those are off, turbo should be somewhat free, and then we gotta take off those hard lines, and then we gotta figure out that stupid evap line that I cannot get off because of just bad engineering. So once we're done with that, then everything else should come off real easy. I got all but one of the manifold bolts off. It's kind of hard to see from up here, but the coolant lines are in the way to get the last one off, so I'm gonna pop those off, and that's a 19 millimeter. Looks like all of them, they're just banjo bolts. It wraps around the bottom, and the entire gasket's one piece for the pressure gaskets, or the crush washers, I guess, on this. So got to keep those together. I still couldn't get this thing out, and now I can see a little closer that there's just no room to actually get a tool up underneath there easily. But I noticed there's a 10 millimeter bolt in here, and I thought, well, this is just an air evacuator, so I'm sure it's just a gasket. I undid that 10 millimeter bolt, and down in the side of the turbo, now you can see it just slides right out, and now I can spin this out of the way, and I never had to undo that or that, which are nightmares. So that's good news. If you're trying to do this yourself, take the 10 millimeter bolt route. Don't try to undo these things. All right, everything's loose, but the oil return drain down here at the bottom, it's just a pressure fit into the oil pan, but I can't get it out by just pulling up on the turbo because it won't clear the studs over here when I'm doing that. So I got to go down, 2 10 millimeter bolts, pop that off, and then we'll have our turbo free. Here's our turbo out of the car, looking pretty clean. I'll test it out, at least test out the wastegate, make sure that's still working, because I can see the flap on this side. You can see that's where the wastegate, where the hell is it? Somewhere in here, right here. There's the wastegate flap. So I just hit with some air pressure on the top of the wastegate solenoid. We can make sure it's actuating properly when there's overboost, and then yeah. I mean, we're not going to do too much else to this thing right now. It doesn't have any shaft play, spins freely, no nasty sounds or anything, so we're good. Now we're back in the engine bay. Now, had I done this in the right order, I would take the heat shield off now. Voila, now we're free. And now we just got to take off those header bolts, and I think we have easy access to all my feeds for my oil line, so I can build a little external manifold for it. And here we are. So if we take a little zoom out here and go in, we can see one of these oil galleys is already in use by our turbo, but I have 2 more oil galleys available that I can tap, and from there I can build a little manifold. So I'm going to run a line there, run it down, and then towards the back of the firewall, and then that's where I can tap in my sensors and any other oil related stuff I want to do later. All right, so let's take a look at what I've done here for my oil pressure line. So this is coming off that main oil pressure galley behind the exhaust manifold. Turbo sits here, all that sort of stuff. And I popped one of these 3 guys off. You can see one's for the turbo feed already over there. I popped this one off, put an AN fitting on it, and then ran a hose down, around, up, and it's a little bit long right now. It's right here, so here's my oil pressure fitting. I'll probably trim that down and put it in a better place eventually, but for now, testing this will work. And this is standard fuel line, so it's a pretty good stuff, but I want to get some braided line over it. This is all I could get available locally. I gotta find someplace online because nobody seems to have this stuff available locally to me. So that's going to take care of my oil pressure line, and I'll put all the fittings that I bought down here and the sizes and everything, so if anybody else wants to do this, they can do it down in the description. And then up here I just have a 90 with an adapter that just goes to standard 1/8 inch for this. So this is just adapters, nothing big there. Now the other thing I did was I tapped the coolant sensor. So this over here is the stock coolant sensor, and then this is to go to my gauge just so I can actually see what it is. This one's going into the ECU. I'm sure it's fine, but I like to know if I'm starting to get warm. And then we can see here I just did an extension, and then with a 90 on it, and then my sensor goes in there. Maybe a little bit easier to see from the top here. Now, right now, as I have it, it's sticking out a little bit and it's a little too close to where my downpipe's gonna be. So what I'm going to do is put a washer, another washer in there, so that it is pointing straight up and down, and then it will be right in this galley right here. It'll be away from the exhaust manifold, no problems for clearance or anything like that. So that takes care of 2 out of the 3 gauges. All right, now you can see I got this stood up properly, and if you look here, I just put 2 washers on it just so I got my threads proper, so this is standing straight up. Now it's out of the way of all of the turbo stuff here. Stock sensor is basically exactly where it was before, just offset about 1.5 inches, whatever length that little T adapter is, and we're ready to rock with that. All right, for the oil temp, I decided to get this ingenious little thing going, and we'll see how well it works. It should work, but the drain plug on the Sky is actually vertical, not on a 45-degree angle or down. So I'm going to use this adapter here on this side, which is the same thread as the oil drain plug, and it goes into an 1/8 inch, and then I got this little barrel extender, same one that I used for the coolant, and that goes out to the sender, so that I can just screw this right into the oil drain plug, and then I will be getting oil at the hottest possible place, which is the bottom of the drain pan, and hopefully get good oil temperature readings as well. If you're a nerd and you really like laminar flow, this car's pretty good at it. It looks like it's not moving at all. Been a few months since I did that first oil change, so if you're curious on yours, oil filter's down here in the back on the driver's side, and it's an 1.25 inch socket to get onto it. You can't get onto it from the side, but there's this nice little hole right here. So what you have to do is take the extension off the socket, put the socket on the thing, slide it through, and then it'll just pop off pretty easy. So actually quite easy, it's just a little confusing. Let's do it. All right, so here's our oil filter from our kind of first run, and as I look through it, I don't see any signs of anything shiny. It looks pretty good. I mean, it's darker than I'd like to see, but I put in a weird homologation of like all the various different types of oils I had in my garage just to see if the thing would run and run some time through it. So when we put real oil and a good new filter in, hopefully we're good. But I'm gonna pitch this thing anyway. We'll try the new one and hopefully we got no problems. Here's our oil, and quite a bit of sun, and nothing really shiny in there when we slosh it around. That's looking pretty oily. That feels good. I think we're in good shape with this motor. I don't think it's too much damaged by the flood. I think it'll run fine. So let's go beat the piss out of it, hopefully on a track someday, somewhere, maybe. I like Wick stuff. That's what I'm using. So it's a 70082 XP. It's the filter for this guy. Let's go ahead and pop it in. We are back underneath the car. That's a little tough to see here, but we can check and see if my new little contraption will work. So I'm gonna take it and feed it in and see if there's enough clearance and make sure all my threading is correct and all that. Yep, it locks right in there, no problem. With the crush washer, it'll be good. And it doesn't hang out very low. I'm not too worried about that. I think that'll work well. Run wire back up to the subframe over here, and then just up and out of the way. So that will be my oil temp sensor. So we got our line run up, and I went down here, zip tied it lightly. It's not pinching anyway. And then up, around, underneath the fender wall here, and then I just zip tied it right to the back of my catch can. Now I'm realizing that it might be a little too tall, so I may have to lower that down a little bit, but that's where it's gonna sit for now. We'll see what happens. I decided my original idea sucked, so I changed it. I had a little piece of foam sitting around, so I just wrapped it a little bit in that, zip tied it back around the backside of that custom bracket I made for my catch can, and also down around the base here, so that it's actually pretty stable. It's not going anywhere, and it's also not gonna rub up against anything, and then the lines are all free and clear all the way back and around to the original location. So hopefully this works. We got our wires in, and now I'm just going to crimp on a fitting for my pressure sensor here, which will just pressure fit on there. It's just a little spade connector, and then you can see I've got a little ringlet on that one, and then I got to run one down to the bottom as well, and then we will be done with running all of our wires in the engine bay. We can slap the turbo back in, get everything going there. Well guys, here I am in the Sky after doing all of my wiring of my new cool gauges, and the car has been sitting for a little while in my driveway because I don't have everything for the cage yet, and I'm still waiting on materials for that, blah 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 blah. And then we run into this fun little thing where I go and I take the key and I turn it on and absolutely nothing happens. And that's really frustrating. I'm guessing it's something voltage related to the BCM. Everything looks like it's plugged in properly. I haven't changed anything. There's no water leaks in here. There's no way it could get in. Something's not grounded right. Something's not feeding voltage properly. So now we get to go in and test. So we can actually turn these stupid things on and see if all my wiring worked, because it's all pretty and wired up down there. So let's figure out what's going on with that. I did a little looking at the schematic diagram, and I may have just taken this and put this relay in the wrong place, because it says that this is the run relay and this is the accessory relay. I don't know where this other relay is, or if it was ever even here. I may have to go back and look at old videos and see if it was ever there in the first place. A little confusing. I don't think anybody came and stole the relay off the back of this thing. Maybe I'm a dummy and just pulled it because I didn't want anybody to be able to start the car and I forgot about it myself. I don't know. Well, after all that pain in the butt, it's exactly what it was. I had the relay on the back in the wrong slot, which was the accessory slot, which I don't think does anything on this ECU or on this BCM. As soon as I swapped it over, plugged everything back in, come on over here, turn the car on, boom, we got action. So now I can actually finish up wiring up my gauges. I got my gauges up, but they're on even when the car is off, like right now. So that means I got the wrong tap. So I got to find which one is the right tap down there. Once I figure out what will work for me there, then I can actually plug the car back in and, you know, make sure that all of this stuff actually works properly and the signals are actually sending properly. Kind of hard to do when there's no turbo in the car, because it's sitting in your passenger seat. We've got it all working. So I tapped in here, which is fuse block number 19. That's for the steering wheel controls, which I don't even need anymore, but I have the fuse tap on it. That goes out, grounded out into the harness I built the other day. And then if we hop up here and take a look, everything is off until I turn the key on. Bingo, I got gauges. Sweet. Now I gotta put the rest of the car together so we can actually test them out. It's a little loud because the car's running, but we got working gauges mostly. Oil pressure still isn't working. I'll figure that one out, but coolant temperature is working. And while we're at it, we are burping the system. So I've come up with a pretty ingenious way of doing this. Take this guy, lift it up and over. You have to unplug the reservoir switch underneath it, the coolant level sensor, to get it to where it needs to be. And then if you find yourself a bottle and a nice little clear hose, you can see the bubbling as it bubbles. And then it just gets recirculated into the bottle. Once this guy starts to get low, take extra from the bottle, put it over here. You also want to make sure the top hose that you unplugged is higher than there. Otherwise, this will start squirting coolant as well. So just from a gravity perspective. So I just have it sitting here with a wrench on it. And let this run for a few more minutes, and hopefully we'll be completely burped. All right, as I'm putting this back together, the first downside of this design is apparent now. If you can see here, I really don't have much room for the very last header bolt or manifold bolt here to, or nut to actually get it on the stud. And so I've got to have a bent angle ratchet, or I would just be here for like an hour with a standard box wrench, which is probably how I'm going to have to finish up tightening it.